Hello, welcome to Thor Talk, the show all about Marvel's resident God of Thunder. On this episode of Thor Talk, I will be sharing my thoughts on the fourth Thor movie, Thor: Love and Thunder. Spoilers ahead on Thor Talk.
I am Thor the Thunderer, son of Odin, prince of Asgard, and this world is under my protection.
So, you probably already know the direction this review is going to go in based on the title of the video. And to be fair, there are some things I genuinely liked about this movie. There are one or two good comic book references, which I as a Thor fan personally enjoyed. Christian Bale gives a great performance as Gorr. The battle in the Shadow Realm had amazing visuals. So there were good things. This is not the worst movie of all time. It is, however, the worst Thor movie. Love and Thunder is a movie that doesn't really do anything particularly well and never quite reaches anything beyond mediocrity. At times it feels like it wants to be something interesting and impactful, but then settles for attempting to be a fun ride. There's a lot to cover, but let's start with the man himself, Thor. Thor is not Thor. Gorr was apparently right. The gods are selfish, vain creatures who care only about themselves, and one of the truest examples of this is Thor himself. In this movie, he's a dumb frat boy who seems only to care about those within his own immediate circle. He goes into battle only to further his own glory. On Indgar, Thor sees people in distress only as an opportunity to show off. He shows little interest in protecting the people of Indgar, and even destroys the temple they were fighting to save. Had he employed the smallest amount of care and restraint in the battle, he could have easily saved their temple. But he doesn't, and doesn't seem too bothered by the fact that he didn't. He seems uninterested in the lives of the Asgardian children he's supposed to save. He's drastically regressed as a character. When he supposedly kills Zeus, he says this will likely lead to catastrophe for the universe and incur the wrath of the gods. He brushes this aside as if it were nothing. Remember the last time that Thor's reckless actions caused war and disaster? Apparently, he doesn't.
You are unworthy of these realms. You're unworthy of your title. You're unworthy of the loved ones you have betrayed.
It is surprising that this Thor seems to be a perfect representation of Thor in the first movie. He's arrogant, loves battle and showing off, and doesn't really seem to care about anyone else. As happy as I was to see Thor wielding Mjolnir again at the end of the movie, I was struck by the fact that maybe he shouldn't be worthy of it. This would not be a problem at all if Thor went through a character arc that involved him taking accountability. An aimless Thor growing complacent in his quest to find meaning after Endgame, only to rededicate himself when he's confronted by Gorr, would be interesting. But this never really happens. He ends up in a better place by the end of the movie, with him raising Gorr's daughter and protecting people with her. But we don't really see him confront his past behavior. I'd like to think that it's lost somewhere in those 2 hours that were cut from the movie, but we'll never really know. As it stands, Thor is at his worst that he's been in a very long time, and he only proves Gorr's point. Or he would if Gorr really had one. The best part of the movie is Christian Bale's performance as Gorr, all 5 minutes of it. Unfortunately, even a talent like Bale can't overcome a serious lack of screen time and poor writing. Gorr's decision to pursue genocide of the gods is really rushed and seems to come more from being controlled by the Necro Sword than any profound reflections. In the comics, he slowly watched everyone he cared about die no matter how much they worshipped their gods. He came to believe that mankind's reliance on the gods was holding them back since the gods never bothered to help them. And he comes to resent the gods for not doing anything while their people suffered. In the movie, he goes from being the most devout follower in the world to being a genocidal maniac who wants them all dead in the span of a few seconds. And again, he has very little screen time, so there's not much opportunity to explore his pain and philosophy. Furthermore, he's by far the least competent Thor villain. All he needs to do is get his hands on Stormbreaker. If he were as powerful as Hela, or commanded an army as strong as Malekith's, he could just conquer New Asgard and take it. If he was as cunning as Loki, he could come up with a decent plan to get Stormbreaker, or find some other way to summon the Bifrost. He proved himself to be none of these things when he is driven off by the small town of New Asgard and is forced to kidnap random Asgardian children with the hope that Thor will follow without bringing a competent army. Most surprisingly, Gorr the God Butcher kills one god on screen, and it is in self-defense, while Team Thor kills 20 gods in Omnipotent City. Love and Thunder chose at the onset that Gorr would be a redeemed villain, and because of this, it is afraid to make him a good villain. It is afraid to make him do anything too villainous, because then the audience won't be able to sympathize with him at the end. Perhaps the audience could see Gorr murder dozens of gods on screen, and still feel like he could be redeemed, but that would only work if the movie was willing to explore his pain and philosophy, and it isn't. Gorr's lack of villainy and screen time also contribute to another problem, a problem of stakes. Thor's two main goals are to rescue the children that Gorr kidnaps and to stop him from using eternity to wipe out all the gods. But neither of these feel particularly important. Gorr kidnaps the children, but we never get the sense that they are ever in any danger. Jokes are made about the children being killed. Gorr makes no threats, and even when he no longer needs them as bait, he just leaves these child gods unharmed. The characters also want to stop Gorr from reaching eternity so that he doesn't wish for the extinction of the gods. But Gorr never actually says that this will be his wish. Valkyrie and the other gods just assume that Gorr probably is going to wish for this, but he never confirms nor denies this. This means that technically this entire movie could just be Team Thor trying to stop Gorr from reviving his dead daughter. The issue of stakes is also made worse by multiple occasions where characters are given what appears to be fatal injuries, but then turn out just fine. Sif, Korg, Zeus, and Valkyrie all seem like they die or should die, but they survive, and this makes the audience feel like characters can't really die in this movie. This is particularly damaging when Jane's big decision to risk her life is a major plot point. Also, why doesn't Thor take Mjolnir with him when he goes to fight Gorr at the end, since he wants to keep it away from Jane and needs all the help he can get? Well, that's because Jane needs to sacrifice herself later on in the movie. But that's a really big plot convenience, and there are many of these throughout the movie. And I get it's a comedy, and it's not trying to take itself too seriously. But this movie is also surprisingly unfunny. Humor is definitely subjective. Maybe some of you found Stormbreaker being a jealous girlfriend funny, or Korg's whistling bit, or Valkyrie's objectification of a naked Thor. I didn't. And I was surprised by how many people in the audience shared my opinion. Most Marvel movies involve a theater cracking up at every other joke, but everyone was mostly silent. This is a movie that often seems like it wants to explore some interesting themes about love and loss and gods, but it's afraid that it will no longer be fun and easily digestible for the audience. Scenes that should have genuine pathos are either comedically campy or feel underdeveloped. The feelings of these characters have to be explained by the funny Rockman rather than letting the audience see it and understand it for themselves. Jane's cancer storyline is brushed over and feels more like something Taika was obligated to include. Valkyrie and Korg are dragged along for the first two acts and don't contribute nearly enough to justify their inclusion. Also, an ice cream shop in New Asgard based around the genocidal tyrant who murdered half of the Asgardians and half of the universe is really messed up. Thor: Love and Thunder is a bad Thor movie. There isn't a single thing in it that another Thor movie doesn't do better. It has no aspirations to be anything more than the roller coaster that Scorsese has called it and its predecessors. It's empty and hollow. I wanted more. The film ended by teasing that Thor will return, and I genuinely hope that he does. After all, it's been a few years since I've seen him.
I have much to learn. I know that now. Someday, perhaps, I shall make you proud.
You've already made me proud.
Well, that's all for this episode of Thor Talk. Unfortunately, this review was rather negative, which is a shame. I was hoping it would end up sticking the landing. But those were my honest opinions on the movie. There's probably more I could have talked about, but I tried to boil it down to Thor and Gorr and some of the overall movie. Hey, at least Hercules showed up at the end, though. Anyway, with that being said, see you next time on Thor Talk, where...
You behold